Hello. Welcome to this webinar where I'm going to be discussing masking at work. So, I think it's really important that we uh, make people feel psychologically safe. So, during this webinar, it's really important that people do what they need to do to feel comfortable. So, if you want your camera off, that's fine. If you want to ask questions, that's fine. If you just want to listen, that's fine as well. And I think this is really important when we're creating neuro-inclusive environments that people feel safe. So a bit about me. I'm Dan. I've worked with neurodivergent individuals in a professional capacity since 2000. Um, and I can't quite believe I've been working with people for 25 years. I qualified as a learning disability nurse in 2004 and then retrained as a social worker in 2010. More recently, I graduated with a master's in business administration. I received my diagnosis late in life. I received it last year at the age of 42. But I've always had an interest in working with neurodivergent individuals. It's always been a real passion of mine. And since my diagnosis, it's really reinforced that passion further. There are far too many barriers for neurodivergent individuals. That starts when they're children and continues into adulthood. And managing on the spectrum, the mission is about removing those barriers and highlighting the skill set that neurodivergent people have. So that's a bit about me. There are many definitions of what masking is. This one from National Autistic Society I quite like. It's a strategy used by some autistic people, be it consciously or unconsciously, and we'll be talking about the unconscious masking later on this webinar. It's about appearing autistic or non-autistic, should I say, appearing non-autistic in order to blend in and to be more accepted in society. And it can happen in formal situations, but also informal situations as well. And from my personal experience, I will often mask more in an informal situation than I will in a formal setting. Often masking is just referred to in the autistic sense, but it happens in people who are ADHDers, dyslexic, and other people with different neurotypes. I get asked this quite a lot. What does masking look like? And the reality is that masking looks different for absolutely everybody. Um, but there are some common examples that I will share that are of my own. The first one I want to talk about is copying body language, or mimicry. People will often copy body language in order to kind of fit in, and we see this in really young children where they will observe their peers to try and know how to act, and this continues into adulthood as well. So copying body language is a really kind of key part of what kind of one kind of masking behavior, so to speak. Repeating words or phrases so commonly referred to as echolalia, that is often, something that can be quite subtle. Um, sometimes people will just see echolalia as the instant repeating of a phrase or word. That's not always the case. I know in my own experience that I could be speaking to somebody and they will say a phrase, and then a couple of minutes later, I will repeat it back to them. So that's quite common repeating of words or phrases. And sometimes as well, another example of this is that people will mimic the accent of somebody. So a British person might be speaking to an Australian person, and they might mimic their accent as well. So that's another kind of example of masking behaviour. And there are obvious reasons that might be misinterpreted. People might think that the mimicry is actually mocking, so that in itself can be risky and has its own challenges. Forcing eye contact, I cannot stand eye contact. I find it painful. I find it difficult. I really struggle with it. However, as a child growing up, you must force eye contact. You must look people in the eyes to develop trust. And it's just for myself. if I'm looking somebody in the eye, I'm going to be spending more time thinking about how long I make eye contact for. Am I staring? Am I not staring enough? When do I look away? When don't I look away? Then, if I'm looking in the corner of a room and actually really concentrating, and the irony with this scenario for myself is that I actually am paying more attention if I'm not looking somebody in the eye than if I'm looking, um, in the looking them in the eye. So that's really important, and that has a knock on kind of consequence as well when we look at recruitment and other things like that. Social scripting is a really interesting one. So social scripting is preparing for a conversation. So this morning I was at a meeting and I had replayed that initial conversation with the host facilitator, the commonly called phatic communication. So hello, how are you? I'm good, how are you? And so on and so forth. Um, but if that script doesn't go to plan, i.e., if I said to somebody, "How are you?" and they said, "Dan, I'm terrible," then my brain would struggle with that because, well, you're not following the pattern. So that can be really kind of difficult. So social scripting, and again, it can happen in any settings. Social events. I have a social event at the end of November. It's now the 11th of November, and I'm already mentally preparing some of the conversations that I'm going to have with at that social event. And then, yeah, it would be interesting to know if people have other examples. Feel free to kind of put it in the chat. I kind of covered this in the definition, but um, neurodivergent people may not realize that they are masking. Myself, I've learned far more about my masking behaviors since I got diagnosed 18 months ago than what I had previously. So, you know, you might not even realize, the individual might not realize they're masking, and you might not realize they're masking as well. And that can have a really kind of detrimental impact on people, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I think that's really important to recognize this, that masking, particularly undiagnosed or late diagnosed people, they might not realize their masking behaviors because, as I've said, really, this behavior, the masking, starts so young and so early on in people's lives that if you started masking as a toddler, and I look back on my life and I can remember examples of where I was definitely masking at preschool, and then you don't get a diagnosis until you're in your 30s or 40s or even 20s. You've already got years and years of masking. So actually, it becomes part of the behavior. And again, part of the challenge is, well, what is the masking behavior and what is the natural behavior? So it's really interesting to kind of think about this. There are a multitude of reasons why people mask, and in this short webinar, I don't have time to go through them, but here are some that I've picked out. Fear of judgment. Neurodivergent people, we spend our lives being judged, and this isn't just some paranoia. It happens. There's a fairly famous study that was completed on neurodivergent, ADHD children to be specific, which identified that by the age of 12, the ADHD children are more likely to receive 20,000 more negative comments compared to their neurotypical peers. And these can be what might seem quite minor. Stop fidgeting, sit still, look people in the eyes, stop talking about your special interest, stop singing that song, and so on and so forth. But that kind of adds up. And so neurodivergent children are kind of we're conditioned to, well, actually being yourself is not, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable by society, and then that continues into adulthood as well. To fit in, neurodivergent people suppress their neurodivergent tendencies to fit in, and that's really, really important to recognize and understand as well. We don't want to stand out. We want to be accepted. The you know the irony with this is that some neurodivergent people mask so well that actually when they then realize that they are neurodivergent, or if they're aware of it they then ask to help. Well, that's when you get, oh, I didn't realise you were insert, you know, insert, kind of neurotype here. And I think that's really important. Ultimately, masking is about protection. You know, we experience negative feedback, and actually what we want is to stop that negative feedback. So if I mask, if I appear neurotypical, if I do what's expected and required as a neurotypical person, then that will prevent me from having the consequences of being neurodivergent. And that's really often at its essence of masking, and that's kind of really, really important. It goes back to my comments about the negative feedback that ADHD children receive by the age of 12, and that continues. So, it's about, if I wear this neurotypical mask, then I am safe. Yeah. And again, it would be good to discuss examples that people may have, or feel free to put them in the chat. Now, there are quite significant consequences to masking, because actually it's exhausting. Constantly masking is exhausting. If I have had a day where I've been masking with people, come the end of the day, I'm absolutely shattered. If I've been in the office or I've been on calls all day, I'm absolutely exhausted, and it can lead to, kind of burnout. Often discussion is autistic burnout, but actually I think there's fairly conclusive evidence that, it's broader than just autism. Actually, a lot of neurodivergent people feel burnt out. And that's really important because, I say, it's tiring. And actually, in order to mask, I'm putting a lot of energy. The person's putting a lot of energy into masking. It's tiring doing the eye contact thing. It's tiring making sure that, kind of speaking appropriately and so on and so forth. So it can lead to, it can have a real impact on people. It can result in impaired communication, because actually what you learn as a neurodivergent person is, actually, if I speak my mind, if I say things, then actually I get reprimanded. So actually, I'm not going to make a suggestion because for fear of getting criticised. And I will do a webinar soon around rejection sensitivity dysphoria, because it has a massive impact, and this is part of this. We have increased staff absence because, obviously, people, if you're exhausted and if you can't communicate, then we see staff sickness going up, and that's really important as well. Companies need to recognize this. 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent, and that's probably, that arguably there's more than that, but currently it's 1 in 5 people. So that has a significant impact. So if you've got neurodivergent people working in an environment where they don't feel safe, where they don't feel supported, then absolutely you're going to have increased staff absence. And then what's the next step to that? People leave. People leave because, actually, if I am working in an environment where I am exhausted and I don't feel that I will be listened to and I can't communicate, and then I end up going sick, why would I stay in that environment? Why would I possibly stay in that environment? So again, it has a massive impact on business. And actually, we know, and I know from my own experience of as a manager, that it costs more to recruit people than it does to keep people and support them properly. So it has a massive impact, and we see this. And actually, there's a lot of focus and a lot of discussion around getting people back into work. We know that neurodivergent people struggle in the workplace. We know there's underemployment of neurodivergent people in the workplace. And this is really significant, because if you want to get people back in the workplace, then you have to ensure that they are psychologically safe, that they are listened to, that they are supported, and then we can retain this. And this kind of feeds into the next bit of the webinar. Creating a supportive environment is not this massive expense to companies. In fact, I would argue that the expense of companies is far more significant by not supporting neurodivergent employees than actually taking positive steps. And the things that can be done are really simple. Open communication, ensuring that people feel listened to and that they will be responded to and they will be respected when they're listened to. You cannot underestimate how important this is. In my own kind of experience, when I had that first conversation with my line manager about the fact that I was autistic and that I need support, and they listened to me and they made me feel validated, and that is so powerful and so important. Creating staff networks are massively important. I highly recommend this book, um, Neurodiversity at Work by Theo Smith and Amanda Kirby. They talk a lot around creative neuroinclusive environments. And one of the chapters, they talk about creating a staff network. A staff network is a safe space for neurodivergent people to feel listened to and heard. And they can share their experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. I've recently set up a staff network in a local authority, and it's been wonderful. It's a space which has grown and supported, and people can they feel listened to. But it's really important that staff networks are not standalone, that they are supported, that they have senior management sponsorship, that people are permitted, allowed, encouraged even to go and attend these networks. It's really powerful, these staff networks. It's important that we challenge stigma. You know, microaggressions are challenged. The whole everyone is insert neurotype here is challenged. Not everyone is autistic. Only 3% of the population are autistic according to certain data. Not everyone is ADHD. There is not uh, overdiagnosis of different neurotypes. In fact, there's still an underdiagnosis. So it's really important. It also goes along to we need to recognize what people can do. You know, yes, there are certain challenges that being neurodivergent has, but there are amazing strengths as well. So that needs to be listened to. We need to embrace difference. And this goes beyond neurodiversity and disability. It needs to be broader than this. Organizations that are diverse are well performing organizations and staff are happy. So we need to embrace the difference, rather than discriminate. And it's important that organizations recognize this. We need to increase the awareness. It's absolutely vital that we increase awareness of neurodivergence and that staff feel that they are listened to and understood. It's important to celebrate the successes of neurodivergent people. It's important to recognize the role that neurodivergent people play in the workplace and the broader society. And there are ways of doing this. We had ADHD Awareness Month um, in October, do an event during that month. The 2nd of April every year is Autism Awareness Day, and then April is Autism Awareness Month. There are other days and months as well and weeks. So it's really important to recognise this. It's about that visibility. And that visibility at all levels. People should not feel that because of their diagnosis they are unable to succeed. Actually, it's incumbent on organizations to create environments where people can succeed, and that's massively important. It's important that training is delivered by people with lived experience. I am able to articulate my experience of being autistic. Um, that said, it's my experience, and some of the challenges I have and some of the strengths I have are not the same as all autistic people, and they're not the same as neurodiverse experience. However, if you want to understand what it is like to be autistic, if you want to understand what it's like to be an autistic employee or an autistic manager, then find people that are living it, and I'd hope that people would contact me, but there are many other organizations out there as well. So it's really important. And I guess the key point is actually, to a certain degree, it doesn't matter who's delivering the training. What's important is that it's authentic. And neurotypical people have a really key role in allyship. They have a really key role in supporting neurodivergent staff, I would be cautious about receiving neurodiversity training about someone who themselves is not neurodivergent, because, as I say, they don't have that lived experience. There are lots of opportunities to discuss this. Masking is incredibly complex. It's an incredibly interesting area, and this short webinar does not do justice to the complexities and intricacies of masking. So, if anyone wants a further discussion, there are several ways that you can contact me. So, you can go to my website, which is www.managingonthespectrum.co.uk. You can email me at info@managingonthespectrum.co.uk, or you can follow me on Instagram at Managing on the Spectrum. I also have a Facebook page, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So, um, I'm going to finish up the webinar, but thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. This recording will be available on my website. I will also post it on my YouTube page. But um, if anything I've said today in this webinar resonates, please feel free to contact me. And if you agree with me, great, tell me why you agree. If there are things that I've said that you disagree or are different to your own experience, fantastic. Let's share that, because actually I think that's really important as well. When we're talking about neurodiversity and when we're talking about neurodivergent individuals, it's important to recognize that there are different opinions and that there are different views. And in order for us to make real change and have a positive impact, we need to listen to those. Thank you very much.